Thank you very much, Senator Carper. We're now going to turn to the witnesses, but I'd like to first introduce Mr. Doug Miyamoto, who is joining us today and the first one to testify. He has served as the director of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture since 2015. In his role as director, Doug deals with issues that we will discuss here today on a daily basis: environmental reporting for Wyoming agriculture producers, predator management, liaising with federal agencies to coordinate environmental resource issues, and many other issues that arise when getting our agriculture products to the end consumer. Doug previously served as the executive director of the Wyoming Livestock Board, the deputy director of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, and in several other positions at the Natural Resource Conservation Service, Wyoming State Engineers Office, and the University of Wyoming. Doug is uniquely qualified to speak to today's issues, both from his professional experience and because he received the highest quality education from the University of Wyoming. He studied range
Shameless. Shameless pandering. What's her mascot? What is her mascot?
My wife has 3 degrees from the University of Wyoming.
Wow, that's pretty
I'm going to get her down here and debate you, Mr. Ranking Member, and you don't stand a chance.
I would lose.
He's uniquely qualified because of his incredible education, background, and degree. He has studied range management for his undergraduate degree and later earned a master's in rangeland ecology. He serves Wyoming well by bringing his holistic approach to his leadership at the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, and I'm pleased that he would join us here today. In addition to Doug, we also have Mr. Ryan Yates, who is the Director of Congressional Relations for the American Farm Bureau Federation, and Mr. Jim Lyons, who is a Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. So I'd like to welcome all 3 of you today. I would like to remind you that your full written testimony will be made part of the official hearing record, and please keep your statements to 5 minutes so that we may have time for questions. Doug, please proceed.
Chairman Barrasso, thank you for that kind introduction. Ranking Member Carper, members of the committee, thank you so much for the privilege of speaking to you today about the ACRE Act. Again, Doug Miyamoto, I'm the director of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, and I also currently serve as the chairman of the Natural Resources and Environment Committee of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. I'm here today to talk about my support, and I'll highlight a few of the reasons why in my testimony today. I'm not an expert on all of the issues that are addressed by the ACRE Act, but there is a common theme of ensuring that the ag industry is subject to the correct and intended regulations for normal agricultural activities. I'll emphasize individual sections of the ACRE Act on which the Wyoming Department of Agriculture and NASDA have concentrated on in recent years, as those are the ones with which I'm most familiar. Importantly, and I'm sure you're all aware, Section 3 of the ACRE Act provides the exemptions from notice requirements and penalties revolving around CERCLA. I don't want to go into too much detail on this because I'm sure you all have heard about the issues surrounding CERCLA, so I would just like to point out some specifics regarding the impact of CERCLA and its affiliated reporting requirements to Wyoming. Exempting farmers and ranchers not engaged in confined animal feeding operations is, in my opinion, simply the right thing to do. CERCLA was never intended to regulate the livestock industry, but rather to ensure cleanup of the nation's most contaminated Superfund sites to protect the public. I've been asked many questions from Wyoming's producers about how they are to estimate emissions and how they're supposed to report those emissions in a non-confined range cattle setting. Unconfined range cattle represents the majority of the operations in the state of Wyoming. And by one suggested measure, this continuing estimating reporting requirement would apply to all livestock operations involving more than 206 head of cattle. Obviously, this standard would incorporate the majority of the commercial livestock operations in Wyoming, and there's simply no way for the majority of Wyoming's cattle producers to know if their cattle are emitting more than 100 pounds of ammonia or hydrogen sulfide in any given day. Frankly, I don't know what to tell producers when they call me for technical assistance on how to comply with CERCLA at this point. The exemptions proposed in this act will provide producers some protection from liability, and it also will address federal agencies of jurisdiction, the EPA and the Coast Guard, and eliminate them wasting their limited resources on administering a program that does nothing to protect public health and also does not ensure that the nation's priority Superfund sites are addressed appropriately. Including livestock operations in the reporting and penalty provisions of CERCLA is counterproductive both for producers and for the agencies, and illustrates why this language has 29 bipartisan co-sponsors. Specific to Wyoming, another section I really wanted to highlight was Section 11 of the ACRE Act, and this simply reaffirms the authorities of the Fish and Wildlife Service to issue appropriate permits to address livestock depredation. As an example, I want to discuss eagle management and its challenges in Wyoming. Wyoming is home to the largest population of golden and bald eagles in the lower 48 states. Wyoming is also known as a destination for wildlife viewing, and we view eagles as a valuable component of a balanced ecosystem. We do not want to decimate eagle populations. But in the instance of newborn livestock losses to eagle depredation, typically additional newborn loss has already occurred before Fish and Wildlife Service can even pursue the first step of an eagle take permit, which is eagle harassment. It is such a slow process that's a rarity for the next step, which would be live capture and removal, to ever even be pursued. Livestock producers have more frequently had to resort to much more surveillance of their young stock. They've had to move herds completely to entirely new locations, and they've had to build and purchase lambing sheds, calving sheds to conduct operations indoors to protect from these depredations. We've seen a lot of sheep business leave entirely due to eagle depredation. In 2017 alone, Wyoming experienced 1,000 sheep and lamb losses to eagle depredation, according to the National Agricultural Statistics Service. This doesn't even mention the impact of ravens on sage grouse, which can be addressed also by this provision within the Act. In conclusion, I would say as a representative of government, I would assert to you that we have an obligation to ensure that our regulations are clear, consistent, and effective. I've made it a goal of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture to support commerce in the ag arena, even given the regulatory nature of our department. One of my highest priorities is to lead the Department of Ag in a manner that emphasizes education before regulation and provides regulatory certainty for our producers. Again, I sincerely appreciate specifically the work of my Senator and Chairman Barrasso, Ranking Member Carper, and Senators Fisher and Donnelly on your specific work on CERCLA. That's very much appreciated. And I also appreciate the opportunity to present to the committee today. And please know I'm available for anything that you may need as a committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your very thoughtful and thorough testimony. Appreciate it.